are united in diversity. We are very heterogeneous in our opinion.
We are doing this in our open democracies, discussing this all open and loud, and I'm not for that.
What is European Union? What is freedom? How we learn together.
The obvious question is, what is the EU doing? What is our plan?
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second half of day one of Politico's Sustainable Future Summit. I'm Joanna Roberts, Politico's Senior EU Policy Editor, and I'm here with James Ferneyhoff, our Energy, Climate and Sustainability Editor. We have an exciting afternoon ahead of us, so make sure to stay with us till the end of the afternoon, as Lars Ågaard, the Danish Minister for Climate, Energy and Utilities, will join us on stage later on to give us his insights into the Danish EU presidency, as well as the outcome of COP30, energy security, and some long-term targets for the EU. Before we kick off those sessions, I wanted to thank our partners for making the summit possible. Our leading partner, Naturgy, our presenting partners, Bentley Systems, CFM, Mars, and Sofic, and our networking partner, IRU. As I said earlier, we do love a good debate. So do share your thoughts with us on platforms like X, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, and others. Please use our hashtag Politico Sustainable Summit. Now, this morning we discussed how Europe's at a crossroads for its climate ambitions. And for this afternoon, we're going to attention on its green ambitions post-Green Deal. We'll be looking at Europe's bio-based future, the Oceans Pact, and its chemicals regulation, diving into some of the key policy elements that allow the EU to deliver on its promises and rethink how it approaches strategic autonomy. Now, James, you've been covering these topics for the last few years. Why are we looking at these three topics this afternoon specifically?
Well, all three have been quite topical this year. We had earlier this year the Oceans Pact and the promise of a new Oceans Act. So that's going to be, they're in the consultation period over the next year or two. So there's a lot of activity going on in Brussels about what should be in that. And then on chemicals, there's a couple of big files. There's the chemicals omnibus, which is in the process of being debated by co-legislators. And there's the big REACH revision, which was supposed to have already been released by now, but has been delayed probably until early next year. So very topical subjects.
The long time coming REACH revision.
Yes.
And your discussion now is going to be on the bio-based economy.
Yeah.
Obviously, we had the strategy last week. What are you looking to get out of this discussion?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's extremely topical because it was just a few days ago that we had the strategy, so we know what's in it. So now we can actually talk about the detail, and we've got someone from Jessica Roswell's, her head of cabinet here to talk about it, so that will be really great. And yeah, so got the detail, let's dig in and have a lively discussion, hopefully.
Great, I'll leave you to it. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us. So as we're just discussing, the bioeconomy is a very topical subject because it's just been released last Thursday, I think it was. So proponents of the bioeconomy argue that Europe's trees and other biological materials can replace fossil fuels in numerous applications, from bioplastics and bioenergy to building materials, chemicals, clothing, creating a renewable industry that doesn't contribute to climate change. It also has geopolitical advantages. Europe doesn't have much in the way of fossil fuels, but it does have forests and farms. It's a nice idea, but skeptics question whether there is really enough biomass to fuel the Commission's grand vision, and they warn overexploitation of forests will have serious impacts on biodiversity and is not benign for the climate, as some claim. Who's right? Well, let's dive into the debate. So we've got today Marco Mensink, who is the Director General of the Chemicals Industry Association, Cefic. We've got Eva Biel, Head of Circular Economy at NGO European Environmental Bureau. We've got Michal Wiesek, who's a member of European Parliament and sits on the ENVI committee. And we've got Paulina Demetkak, who's the head of cabinet for the Environment Commissioner, Jessica Rosval. So Paulina, if we could start with you, could you just give us the quick 1-minute pitch about why this is such a great strategy and what the key points are?
Well, thank you very much and good afternoon. And it's not starting well for me because apparently I need to have this handheld microphone. No, I will start with 4 words about the bioeconomy. It is about decarbonization, it's about innovation, it's about competitiveness, it's about resilience, it's about creating jobs and growth in Europe. It's already 5% of European GDP and clearly the potential is much bigger. So what do we want to do? What did we propose last week in our strategy? 4 main pillars here. The first is about scaling up and making sure the single market works. It's not only true for the bioeconomy, but definitely something we need to work on for the bioeconomy. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is to create lead markets, and you mentioned some of the areas we're looking at, biochemicals, bioplastic, biopackaging, you name it, a lot of potential there. The third point, and you referred to it already, is of course the use of biomass, the sustainable use of biomass, making sure that we are smart about it. And the fourth and last dimension is the global dimension, from the international cooperation we need with others, but of course also making sure that we have a level playing field for the EU bioeconomy operators. I leave it at that for starters.
Okay, brilliant. Mikael, you've got a background in, you're an expert in forests and ecology. You've been thinking a lot about this strategy. You've talked a lot about it. You've been quite critical of it before it came out. Now we've got the strategy in front of us. What's your take?
I was not only thinking about the strategy, I was also talking, for instance, with Commissioner Rosval about the strategy. And I was speaking one important thing. It's good to have a good strategy, a bioeconomy strategy. I agree on that. But there needs to be a lot of safeguards in order not to distort, for instance, the market, not to distort the ecosystems that the bioeconomy strategy and bioeconomy itself is dependent on. So, in other words, to be sustainable. And a critical component of that sustainability for me was that this bioeconomy strategy, despite being focused on using of biomass, should also be focusing on the strict protection of old-growth forest and primary forest when you're talking about timber. And it should not be allowed to really encroach into them. That was my really red line that I was really stressing also to Commissioner Commissioner Rosval. And now when I see it being published or proposed by the Commission, I still miss this safeguard in there. So I still am skeptical and will be critical on this.
Okay. And Ava, what's your take? Do you agree with that position? Are they your concerns as well?
No, yes, it's no surprise that we, of course, were very disappointed as well with this strategy. I think the fact that it focuses on demand creation now, if we look at all the industries that want to decarbonize or that want to build resilience using biomaterials, if we put all of these industries together and we grow that demand in forests, but also in agriculture and aquaculture, then we are far beyond what our ecosystems can sustain. We are already in ecological overshoot now. So the fact that the strategy mentions any further growth should be in line with planetary boundaries is a bit of a contradiction there, because we are already beyond what planetary boundaries can sustain. And then I thought also about some of the claims in there, like the fact that we are 90% self-sufficient on biomass, which I don't know. I mean, I wasn't able to verify that directly in the source, but it's certainly not true for all industries. So I think we need to be cautious about that and not cushion the safeguards in vague wording of if feasible or if member states decide to do so in Chapter 3. I mean, that should be Chapter 1, and if it doesn't work out, we don't do it.
Just before I come to you, Marco, because I think we should give Paulina right of reply on a couple of those points. So on the old-growth forests, why were there not protections in the text on that?
I mean, I think if we look at the strategy, and I mentioned it myself, I mean, we have a chapter which is about the sustainable use of biomass, and of course, making sure that we take care of our natural resources, as was rightly said. To grow the bioeconomy, we need natural resources and we need to take care of them. At the same time, if we look in the broader perspective here, we want to decarbonize, we need to decarbonize, and one way of doing that is, of course, to use more natural and biological resources, and that is why we need a bioeconomy. So I think we probably have slightly different perspectives here, but we believe that what we have put forward in the strategy, it's balanced. And of course, obviously, we need to take care of our forests. We need to take care of our planetary boundaries, because if not, we will not have a bioeconomy. But for me, that's a balance, and I think from our perspective, we have found the right balance there.
And the balance is between self-sufficiency and the environment?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at the availability of biomass, of course, indeed, this is something that we need for all to scale up all these various sectors that I mentioned already. So at some point, there is, of course, a trade-off to be made. But I think the starting point must be that these are resources that we have in Europe and that we should and can use, that has a great potential. But obviously, we need to do things in a smart, sustainable way and respecting our ecosystems.
I didn't do a word search in the document for planetary boundaries, but I don't remember seeing that. This is the idea, for those who don't know, that it's not, climate change is one of the planetary boundaries, but I think there are 9 now. Biodiversity is one of the big ones, of the points at which you go beyond what the Earth can sustain. And was that a big consideration in writing this?
But it definitely was consideration, and it is mentioned. I think there's a lot of language in the strategy around taking care of the planetary boundaries, taking care of our biomass availability, taking care of biodiversity more in general. But again, I think that what we try to do is, on the one hand, making sure that we have a good basis to work on. And again, if we don't have a very well-functioning ecosystem, we don't have a bioeconomy. At the same time, we believe that this is an important sector for Europe in these geopolitical times when we need to use our own strategic homegrown resources in as good way as possible. And that's basically what we are trying in this strategy, to put in place a regulatory ecosystem, if you wish, a regulatory framework that makes sure that the bioeconomy can thrive and can expand, but of course within the planetary boundaries and taking care of our natural ecosystems.
Marco, turning to you. You represent the chemicals industry in Europe. I think when people think of the bioeconomy, they probably don't immediately think of chemicals.
They should.
They should. So explain to us where the chemicals sector fits into this.
So first of all, and thanks for being here, I'm a forester by education, so I'll feel free to jump in forestry debates as well. But I ended in the chemical industry, clearly recognizing the chemical industry is at the heart of the bioeconomy, and vice versa. The bioeconomy for us is one of our key levers for decarbonization. Why saying that? Because it's much more than forestry. It's sugar, it's fermentation. There is other bio-based technologies from agriculture which are already in place and happening, just not forestry alone. We have a huge investment of UPM Cummene in Germany, where my heart is a paper company turns chemical company, which is now being built up. But there's also smaller companies like GF Biochemicals and others, SECAP, who have been working on this for decades. Now, where do I think is the opportunities and where do I think we need to go? First of all, we like the draft plans for the bioeconomy, but we call them drafts because they're not yet finished. We need to follow up with the Single Market Act for the Bioeconomy, which is not the Biotech 2 Act. It's not biotech, it's bioeconomy. And we need to have a much broader view. We can look at Ukraine as a source in the future, which will build part of their economy. We already have Mercosur with quota. And on a simple one, if you electrify cars, there's a blend of 10-15% bioethanol in fuel. If that falls free, that's a super tanker a day in 2040, which we can use as feedstock. And then I haven't talked about forestry there yet. So I think it's much broader. We should really push hard.
Just to interrupt you there, when you say feedstock, we're talking about replacing oil.
Replacing fossil molecules with bio-based molecules.
So getting the carbon for plastics specifically?
For lots of chemicals,
okay.
Yes.
From biomass rather than fossil fuels?
That's from biomass, from sugar-based, from lignin-based, there's loads of developments there. So for us, it's a much broader debate. It's also, and maybe that's one critical comment, it's very EU-centered now. We think this strategy should be, like I say, Ukraine, Brazil, US, what's possible there. And to just already connect to my neighbor, it's always good to put me on stage next to EEB. I wouldn't understand why the same sustainability criteria that apply to biofuels shouldn't apply to biofeedstocks either. So we're not moving in the direction there of simplifying it just for the future. I think there's a framework. The only point where we're critical, anything you burn in biomass, you can't use as a feedstock. And that's where the cascade of use needs to come in. And that's where actually the debate Politico has especially made on bioenergy. I would turn back again. You will need to use the biomass where the value is the highest. Let me leave it at that.
I'd like to come back to this idea that we should be looking around the world for sourcing biomass. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry?
We should be looking beyond Europe to sourcing the biomass.
So I have the same feeling with recycling, where we're now at, and the same feeling with the bioeconomy. We're saying you need to run a marathon. Here's all the vitamins you need. Go race. And by the way, we're hanging 3 metal balls in your ankles, which makes it a bit hard to race. If we would have put the constraints on recycling we now do on plastic recycling on paper, glass, or metal, there wouldn't have been recycling in the world. So you need to start, and you need to run, and you need to race. And the only way to build a bioeconomy is to make it global. Mm-hmm. Having been at COP, I was in Belém recently, you see there exactly the bioeconomy is the key topic, but then see it as an economy and not just as an innovation strategy, which means you need to look at not only the domestic supply, but also the global supply.
So this is basically looking around the world. You mentioned Mercosur, so looking to, there's a lot of biomass in Latin America, but there's also huge environmental issues with, the sort of development that's getting that biomass out. I mean, Eva, what's your take on this idea that we should be looking beyond Europe?
I think that we need to think about the fact that we are globally in ecological overshoot. I mean, those planetary boundaries that you mentioned, 7 out of 9 of them have already been crossed. And that's an issue for Europe, but that's also an issue in Brazil and China and everywhere else around the world. So I think we have to be very serious about deciding what we mean by value and defining what we mean when we say value. We want to use the highest value applications. What does that mean? Is that ecosystem services? Is it societal value? Or is it what fetches the highest market price? So whether or not, I think it's undeniable that we are deeply dependent on foreign biomass sources. For example, to feed the livestock that will produce the manure that will be valorized in the strategy. It's about 70% imported biomass to feed that livestock. So we already we cannot deny that we are sourcing biomass from outside of the EU, and we have to, in the EU and globally, be sure that we apply criteria to that biomass that define clearly the sourcing and that define clearly where we can use it, because we are using 4 times more resources than our planet can sustain. So it's not a 1-for-1, let's swap out plastic with bio-based, and then we're fine, because we are 4 times above the amount of resources that we can consume while remaining within planetary boundaries.
Can I add to her? Sorry, I'm on stage.
Go for it.
If I currently put biomass in a chemical factory, if I burn it, I get a subsidy, or I get a zero in emission trading. If I put it underground, I get twice the subsidy. That's called BECCS. If I put it in ethanol, if I put it in whatever fuel application, I get subsidies. When I make a product out of it, I get nothing. That's the first distortion that needs to be taken out. And that's where I say use it to the highest value. So either remove the other subsidies, either put subsidies on feedstock, which we know there is no money for. But this is the fundamental one. And the second fundamental one is if I then try it differently and I get obligations either on the feedstock or on the product, a gap opens, which is called supply from China. Because currently our customers don't pay for bio-based, they don't pay any premium while we're trying to invest. And that's the second point the strategy needs to cover. And demand creation, we don't mean massively increase the demand, but make sure that when you invest in a sustainable bioeconomy factory, that actually people pay for what comes out, which is currently not the case.
Mikael, do you get your thoughts on subsidies for biomass to be burnt but not to be used as a feedstock? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mentioned already that good bioeconomy strategy should not distort the market. And subsidies are exactly the main tool to actually distort the market. That's why it was very principled to have this cascading use principle being put into the field. And we managed that in the previous mandate. But again, there was a huge loophole introduced with regard to timber, where the salvage timber is actually outside of this wood cascading principle and can be subsidized even to be burned. So a lot of loopholes, even in the previous mandate, which was very environmental friendly. Now we live in a very different environment, political environment, so I would be very afraid actually to open up new Pandora boxes and allow Parliament, Council, and all the other stakeholders to really run across these principles and burn it. Another remark is on the import of the biomass. Like, bioeconomy strategy claims that its goal is to be sustainable, that it's part of the decarbonization activities, that it does not do the significant harm to other sectors. But how can you guarantee that if you are importing biomass from third countries? Like, see what has happened to UDR, for instance. We, ourselves are trying to do the most to not to have those guarantees back up there in the field. So I don't buy that. I think this is part of some sort of not very frank policy, and I would definitely not go to the direction that we claim that we are sustainable by importing biomass from third countries. This is not how it's going to happen. If we are going to be sustainable, we really have to understand what's the impact of our activities back home and all around the world, and we have to really have to have those safeguards that whatever we do with the biodiversity, with the biomass, with the bioeconomy, it's not doing a significant harm to European ecosystems, to European markets, or the global counterparts. And this is not the case right now.
Okay. Can I?
I wanted to move on. I'll come to you now, but one of the big, and feel free to answer this when you speak, but one of the most striking things about this, we saw an early draft of the strategy, which was quite strict about not using biomass for, what was the wording? I've written it down somewhere. For the to disincentivize inefficient biomass combustion. And that was something which, so this is like the using of wood chips and various types of biomass to generate electricity and heat. And the original draft was pretty strict, saying, no, that is not what we mean by the bioeconomy. That was removed, and then the final version said something like, said bioenergy continues to play a role in energy security, particularly where it uses residues, does not increase water and air pollution, and complements other renewables. What happened there? Why did you change your mind?
As you will appreciate, I will, as is usual Commission practice, not comment on various drafts of various documents that have been circulating. I mean,
did the sort of forestry industry get to you and say, no, you can't do this?
I mean, as always, of course, when we prepare a document, and as everyone in the room knows, there are often always different versions, and that's made part of the process, so I'm not going to comment on that. But just in general, obviously, and I said it myself in my introductory remarks, of course we need to make sure that we use biomass in a smart way. It is not, we don't have an endless supply of it. Nowhere in this bioeconomy strategy does it say that the Commission would be suggesting that we should now import all the biomass from other countries. We don't say that. We need to use our biomass smart. Of course, there will be trade-offs. We have in the Renewable Energy Directive the so-called cascading principle, which kind of sets out that biomass should be used in an as efficient way as possible.
So the cascading principle. So that's how does that? Can you just lay that out very briefly?
So it basically is exactly what you were just mentioning in terms of focusing on the high value use, and then the last phase, if you wish.
So what would be sort of top of that principle? What would be the most sustainable use of biomass?
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, you have the food security, the production of material, etc., and then the last one would be.
What sort of materials are we talking about?
Well, it can be exactly. It can be, for example, biochemicals, bioplastic, biopackaging, etc. So I think that, I mean, again, I do think that we really tried to be very clear that we don't have an infinite supply of biomass. We need to use it in a good way. And of course, this is broader than forest. I think that's very important to keep in mind. On the international dimension, since I only had 1 minute to start with, I only said global dimension, but there is a chapter on the international dimension which I think is really, really important. Part of that is obviously cooperating with third countries, with our international partners, to make sure that we have sustainable frameworks everywhere. So that's part of the global dimension. And the other dimension would be, of course, the level playing field, in the sense of our companies seeing fair competition in other countries as well. And then maybe just also to mention the markets, and picking up something that Marco was mentioning. I think that we do have an issue in the sense that there's a lot of super fascinating and really cool innovations in this area. What everyone tells us is it's difficult to scale this up. We have single market barriers. not unique to the bioeconomy, but also in the bioeconomy area. So we need to look at those. Some of the barriers are in the environmental area, others, of course, across in the policy areas of other commissioners in other portfolios. But for example, making sure that we can have quicker approvals of some of these products when they're brought to the market, that's something that would help the single market, that's something that would help Europe's competitiveness, and that's something that is still being looked at, and that's why we have a couple of actions in the strategy which we will then be following up on.
Just on going back to the energy, so there's kind of acceptable bioenergy and there's unacceptable bioenergy. What is a good use of biomass for energy?
Well, this is partly the energy portfolio, part of the energy discussion, which is part of the bioeconomy strategy. But our focus here is not on the bioenergy. Again, if the alternative is fossil fuel, I think we all agree that bioenergy is contributing to reducing our dependence on fossil fuel in Europe. But again, of course, there's a lot of useful uses of biomass before you come to the energy point. But I think we should not discard bioenergy. It is an important part of the energy mix in some member states. And again, I think if this is helping to keep away our dependence on fossil fuel, that's of course something that we should not be close to. But it's as always a matter of finding the right balance, of course.
Eva, what's your take on the bioenergy being included in the end?
Well, disappointing, of course. Certainly the way that it's been phrased, which has a lot of loopholes. And I think, of course, we all know that the cascading principle in RED is not complete in terms of identifying all of the value applications. It's missing, you mentioned food, but we think food for direct human consumption should come first rather than overfeed, for example. We also think that long-lasting products should be prioritized over short-lasting product, like timber in modular construction for houses that can last hundreds of years, compared to something that will, be a single-use cup that's thrown away 5 minutes later. So I think there's a very big difference between using a giant tree for timber and construction or using it for popsicle sticks. So I think we have to introduce more nuance and more information in the cascading use principle, so it's not just about what are the 3 points before we burn it, but actually, since we don't have enough, what should we use it for? What is of value to society? Some chemicals are, but some chemicals are maybe not of the highest value to society. So
Marco, I'll come back to you in a minute, but so a lot of your members produce plastics, petrochemicals companies. Plastic, obviously, if you get the fossil fuels out of plastic, that sort of solves one problem, but doesn't solve the pollution problem, which is a massive issue. This is becoming something that's getting more and more media about the sort of plastic pollution, oceans, microplastics everywhere. Does this, just because you're using, it doesn't really deal with the problem of pollution, does it? What's your justification?
That you're mixing two debates. Biodegradability is a different issue than the bioeconomy. So the problems you address have to do with the biodegradability, which, if it's not biodegradable, independent from what feedstock, can be an issue. So I think you need to separate the two here. The feedstock issue as bioeconomy is what do we use to make the materials. The pollution problem can be the same for a bio-based material and a non-bio-based material. Yeah. Depends on how the products degrade. But if you allow me, I'd like to say 2 words on the cascade as well, because it was coined, I think, 15 years ago, and we built it based on the ladder van Lansing, the waste hierarchy. That was the initial thought. Can you sort of do that? So when we came with that idea, we said, actually, if biomass is scarce, you need to get the most value out of there for society. That was the basis of the whole cascade use. We have either sugar, or we have timber, or we have lignin of cellulose. Where do you have the highest value coming to society? Now, that can be a very, very specialized chemical. That could also be timber or a harvested wood product. That's where you have to assess. What we said as well, the hierarchy of use is a principle for subsidies. The market will sort itself out, but if you spend money as a government, you should spend the money where the highest value comes back. And I think that's where the current system with bioenergy subsidies doesn't work, because there's already a neutral emission under the emission trading system, and where you can rebalance and focus on getting the highest value out. And if you say that's food for people or food for animals or timber, etc., that's details on that principle.
So were you disappointed that bioenergy made it into there in the end?
No, I think the Commission was smarter. I think, sorry to be so frank, I think Politico picked up an issue in textual differences, and always in this town, drafts don't mean anything until they come out. Sorry, that's the way it goes. If you looked at the cascading principle is firmly located in the bioeconomy strategy, that's your guideline, your leitmotif, you're going to end up at the same result. And the rest, with all due respect, was a bit of political noise. I think we need to take it much further. You need to get the bioeconomy strategy into a bioeconomy single market act where you sort these things out.
Mikael, what's your take on why the politics behind why, since the Commission won't tell us why it ended up being in there as a political man?
I see the problem with this proposal that it actually talks about scaling up the bioeconomy in the European Union. And it's saying that we need to scale up despite or regardless of the situation in the field. And the situation in the field is not very good, to be frankly speaking. The condition of European forest is really deteriorating right now. We are not talking about the quantity, we are talking about the quality. It's member state by member states, the situation is worsening. For one instance, in Romania, in the Carpathian Mountains in Romania, in the last 3 years, more than 70,000 hectares of old growth forest has been extracted, majority of that lying in the Natura 2000 sites. This to me doesn't sound like something sustainable. This to me sounds like breaches of the law, European law. And I hope that European Commission will intervene. We see huge forest fires, we see decline in biodiversity, we see decline in the delivering of the ecosystem services. That is the reality of European Union. Despite of that, we are talking about scaling up the extractive efforts in European forests. What can the impact be? It would be not good. When we are talking about the market, we see a huge shortage of high-quality timber in the market. Why? Because on one side, we are, without any sort of assessment, exporting roundwood, high-quality roundwood to China on an ever-increasing rate. We don't follow that. At least Commission has no data on that, for instance, which is quite surprising to me. And we see the individual industries regarding the wood actually competing about the resource, which partly is being burned in the form of high-quality timber, which again contradicts the cascading use principle. And why is it happening? Because there are subsidies in the field who are distorting the market and make it actually wise to burn wood instead of using it in the other sectors. So I think that as long as we don't tackle these issues, it's very risky to actually scaling up these fall activities, and the impact will be negative.
This year, the forest monitoring law was, which was in the process of being almost finalised, was then dropped.
Exactly.
Does that, when we're going gung-ho with the bioeconomy strategy and we have dropped this idea of it's a law that requires countries to just monitor the health of forests around the EU, do you see that as connected? And
I would say so, that it's interconnected. Someone's interest is not to have proper data about what's happening in the European forest. To me, this is a signal that something is full, something is rotten, if you want. In the state of Denmark, not necessarily Denmark itself, but the European Union in general. And I think that this was really a very false step from the part of European Parliament to really kill those legislation that would be very necessary to properly understand what's happening in the European forest. Only making use of the data that we already have on a really concentrated level, where European Commission would have the knowledge and would then have the possibility to reflect it properly.
Pauline, what's your response to that?
No, I mean, I think I probably take a bit of a different perspective here. I do think that I don't see a contradiction. I think that what we try to express very clearly in the bioeconomy strategy is that there is a potential here, and I still think there is a potential for the European economy for job creation. We have figures showing that every 1 job in the bioeconomy creates 3 indirect jobs in Europe. This is important in a context of geopolitical challenges where we have a productivity and a competitiveness challenge in Europe. At the same time, the bioeconomy strategy is very clear that we, of course, need to respect our ecosystems. We need to respect our planetary boundaries. So I just don't fully agree with this contradiction. I think that if you are smart about it, if we have smart policies, I think we can do both. There's a lot of innovation out there, a lot of very interesting things happening. There is clearly a potential to scale this up, and again, of course, scaling this up in a smart way in the single market. Monitoring and having a good data of how the state of our forests, the state of our natural resources more in general, the state of our biodiversity, the state of our ocean, that is really, really important. And of course, getting this data is something that will continue to be very important. Now, as you mentioned yourself, it was Parliament voted down the forest monitoring proposal, but the idea of making sure that we have data, whether that is based on national system or European system, is of course very important.
We're coming towards the end of it, so I thought maybe just to finish off, I'll go around with just a final short question for each of you. Paulina, starting with you, this strategy is, there's a lot of words in there, but in terms of actual legislation, money, there's not an awful lot. I mean, is there one measure that people should look at and think this is actually going to deliver real world change?
I think it's difficult to speak about one measure because precisely the world is complicated.
But if we could just take one very concrete thing that's in there that is going to have an impact.
Well, I mean, I think there is some funding, for example, so that I think will be important. We clearly need funding from the European Investment Bank and others to scale up. So I would maybe mention that then. Okay, all right, great.
Mikael, I mean, you've said a lot of things that you're concerned about in this strategy. If you had to say one thing that you really would urge the Commission to watch out for, and maybe a boundary that you don't want them to cross, what would it be?
Okay, Commission should realize that we are currently extracting 90% of the European increments. So that's the framework or the potential, and this is being legally extracted. We don't know about the illegal extraction, so we might probably be above this 100% of increment. So that's the remit of being sustainable. If I would have an advice to Commission, just please reflect very rigidly on the restoration regulation goals in your strategy and on the strict protection of primary and old-growth forests. Otherwise, you are going the wrong direction.
Okay, great. And Eva, same question to you.
Good question, and I would agree with what you said. I think I would urge the Commission to read the recent State of the Environment report published by the European Environment Agency. There's one good statistic in there that mentions the 72% of companies in the euro area real economy are deeply dependent on ecosystem services. So for those companies and for us and our children, I would recommend that we start from a different starting point, that we are indeed already in ecological overshoot. There is no, so that we don't, go beyond planetary boundaries. We have gone beyond planetary boundaries. How do we go back? Maybe stop talking about eroding the nature restoration legislation. Maybe stop using omnibuses as an excuse to reopen and erode further pieces of legislation. Maybe recognize that we are in ecological overshoot and start from that point.
Okay, and Marco, I think you've mentioned already the one thing that you would like to see, which is actual legislation. Just talk us through that again.
So there's always a box in a strategy, and the box talks about the Biotech Act 1 and 2. Let's call it the Bio Booster Act or the Bioeconomy Single Market Act, which should come out Q3 next year. That's the one measure. And I try to be un-Dutch, meaning not very blunt, but this bioeconomy strategy is not about forestry alone. And I'm a forester, I know the forest issues. This bioeconomy is about citric belge. It's in Tienen down the road. It's sugar residues, which are circular, bio-based, and they make citric acid. Currently, they're not selling because the Chinese are flooding the market and there's no demand in Europe. That has nothing to do with growing tree. That's about a circular, bio-based company making relevant biochemicals here in Europe, not able to function much longer because of the fact that we don't have a single market, we don't have a global overview, and we have the Chinese coming in. And that's where, please make the bioeconomy much larger than it is. That's where you need the legislation, where the innovations are coming. Giving full credit to what you say on the forestry part, but we need this Bioeconomy Act to come definitely to help us get that economy off the ground.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I think that was a very interesting and forthright exchange of views. There's a lot of issues to be explored as this unfolds, so we will promise to keep a very close watch on it for you, so please do keep reading Politico on this. So we're now going to ask you all to please stay seated and invite onto the stage Riccardo Procacci, President and CEO of Propulsion and Additive Technologies at GE Aerospace, and Delphine Dijou, Vice President, Engineering Deputy for Commercial Engines at Safran Aircraft Engines for a branded segment, moderated by Katie Palasol, General Manager UK for Politico. So thanks so much to our panellists. Thank you.
Thank you.